Hello everyone, and welcome back to episode 3 of my Starbound Modding 101 tutorials. Today, as you can see, we're talking a little bit more in depth about JSON. We covered this in the first video, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth, and then in our next video we're going to dive into creating a simple mod. So what JSON stands for, again, is JavaScript Object Notation, and that's a fancy way for saying that it is a storage format for data. All the data for all the objects in Starbound, to some extent, are stored in the JSON files. All JSON data is read on startup. So when the game is first starting up, you might be annoyed because Starbound sometimes takes a while to get going. At startup, it takes a while to load. And that's because all of these JSON data files are being read when the game is starting up. There is another type of file that we'll get into later. It's called Lua. It's a scripting language of script files, and they are accessed at runtime, which means the Lua scripts are run while the game is running. JSON files don't do that. They're all run before the game starts. At its core, JSON is just a collection of name-value pairs, and those are very important. We're going to talk about those in just a second, but that's simply put, all that JSON is. If you're looking in the assets, all the Starbound files that aren't image files or sound files or Lua script files are all JSON files. They have all sorts of different extensions depending on what they're used for. Some end in .animation, some end in .config, some end in .object. It just depends on what they're being used for. So name-value pairing, this is the core, the crux of JSON here. When you look in a JSON file, you'll see lots of lines that look something like this. You'll have a name on one side, in quotes, and then a colon, and then a value on the other side. So some examples of what we could have in these name-value pairs is if, say we were creating a person named Bob. So we would want that person to have a name. So on one side, the name of this field is name, and the value of this field that's attached to name is Bob. So we have this person's name is Bob, and because Bob is a word, this value is put in quotes. Most of the time when you'll see a word in JSON made up of letters, it will be in quotes. That's called a string. So we have a second name-value pair here. The name of this name-value pair is age, and then the value is 42. So that Bob is 42 years old. And so 42 is a number. The thing with numbers in JSON is they don't need to be in quotes. JSON knows how to read numbers just on their own. So most of the time, if it's just a number, you do not need quotes around it. Now each name-value pair in JSON, as you'll see, needs to be separated by a comma. If you don't put those commas in, it's a small thing, but JSON will throw you errors. It's because the computer needs to know when one name-value pair is done and the next one is beginning. So you indicate that by a comma. So now we have something that looks a little bit different than those other two name-value pairs. We have a field with the name children. And then Bob has multiple children, so we want to put multiple values in this children field. So what we'll do is we'll use these square brackets to indicate a list of values. So inside here, we reference the values just like we normally would. These are each words made up of letters, so we put them in quotes, and then we separate each one by a comma, so it knows that we're going from the first value to the next and to the third. And this is what is referred to as an array. So if you are grouping multiple values with one name in a name-value pair, then you'll put it in square brackets. So now we have something a little bit different. We have a different type of grouping. We have the name of this name-value pair is dog. So we want to describe this dog, but we can't describe it with simple just strings or simple words. We want multiple name-value pairs to describe this dog. So if we want to group multiple name-value pairs with one name, then we'll use these, they're called curly braces. Whoops. So these curly braces indicate multiple name value pairs grouped with one name. So the name, we've got a name field here with the value Duke, a name field here called breed with the value Bloodhound. And so the difference between the square brackets group multiple values with one name, and the curly braces group multiple name value pairs with one name. So now we're going to go on and we're going to mix it up a little bit. This is called nesting, when we have different groupings inside each other. So we have a field, the name is cars, and then we see these square brackets, so we know that we're going to have multiple values. But within these multiple values, we want each one of these values to have multiple name value pairs. So we're going to group the values in curly braces. So we can think about this as we have the name side, which is cars, and then we have these square brackets, and we can think of everything inside these curly braces as just one value. So we have two values grouped with the name cars. Inside each of these values, we have two name value pairs. So that's the idea of nesting, is that you can put groups inside of groups. So inside the value groups, we have two name value pairs. So we have two name value pairs with each of these two values. I feel like I'm saying this over and over, but it's really important. It's a difficult concept to grasp. One more time, the square brackets are used with multiple values paired with one name. Curly braces used when you are grouping multiple name value pairs with one name. So how do I make mods with JSON? Well, you just change the values. Going back to Bob here, we could, if this was a piece of JSON in Starbound, we could go in and say, okay, I don't want this car's brand to be Ford anymore. I want it to be Toyota. So I would go in and change the value side of this to Toyota. Or maybe I could change it to Nissan or Mitsubishi. The values that you can change the value side to are dependent on the code, on the Starbound code. There's no explicit list that says every value that I could put in here for brand, but the Starbound game is expecting certain values in this case. So let's say we try to put in Hyundai in here, and Hyundai isn't a valid value, so our Starbound game will throw us an error and crash. We just need to figure this out through trial and error. Different values can be paired with different name fields. While we are on this page, I just realized I didn't talk about this important name value pair here. This is a third type of name value pair. We've talked about names that are paired with word values and names that are paired with number values. But this is a third type of value, and it's called a Boolean value. And we don't need to put quotes around this, even though it's composed of letters, because a Boolean only has two kinds of values. It can either be true or it can either be false. In this case, it's false. And so since there's only two types of values, the computer doesn't need us to put quotes around it. It just knows if it sees a true or a false outside of quotes, it's a Boolean. So what this is telling us is this car running? And the value is false, because no, it's not running. The only other value we could put in here is, yes, it is running. You use true or false for any yes or no fields. You can also add, remove, or sometimes change the name side of the name value pairs, but you've got to be really careful, because Starbound game is expecting certain name fields to be present. If I tried to come in here and if I was creating this object Bob and I just took out the age field, the game would probably throw me an error, because in the creation of this person Bob, I have to have an age. It doesn't give me the option to not have an age. No person doesn't have an age unless they're dead, in which case they're not probably going to be in our person list anymore. So we need to be careful when we're changing the name side around, Mostly we're going to be focusing on changing the values. Some name value pairs are optional. Some you can take out that you just need to figure out through trial and error. But be careful with that. You can also completely make up your own name value pairs. And so long as the syntax, so long as the grammar is right, you can do that. That's fine. You can add in as many new things as you want and it won't throw you any errors. And again, trial and error is your friend. Use it. Not everything with the Starbound code can be looked up. A lot of things you can, but most things you just have to use your logic and your intuition as to what values you can change things to. Just, tweak them a little bit and see what happens. Lastly, some rules of thumb. Never leave a value without a name and vice versa. So, don't leave half of a name value pair hanging around in your JSON. It's going to cause issues. So words, if you have a word value composed of letters, you put quotes around it. Numbers, no quotes around it. Boolean values, true or false, you don't need quotes around it. Square brackets, one name paired with multiple values. Curly braces, one name paired with multiple name value pairs. There will never be multiple names in a name value pair. So you won't have, on the name side, name and age, and then a number on the other side, because that just doesn't make sense. You don't need multiple labels for one value. And then, again, learning by trial and error, that's the most important thing that I can get across to you. JSON, once you learn the syntax, you can avoid a lot of errors, but sometimes if you pass it in the wrong value or something that the game doesn't want you to put in there, it's going to crash and throw an error. And that's when you need to use your Starbound log. Start the starbound.log, and that will give you a very detailed description. Well, a fairly detailed description of what kind of error you're throwing, and it will help 90% of the time to track down the error. All right, so that is JSON. Hopefully it made sense. And for our next video, we're going to dive into actually creating a mod. I know, right? It took 3 videos to get to that, but we're finally going to get there. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.